fellow translators that I could have hoped to have been on the same stage with. I'm first going to very briefly introduce the persons here to you, and just to let you know that if you've been reading Indian literature in translation in English, have you been reading Indian literature in translation in English? Yes? Yes? Don't you like that sound? So the people who made it possible for you are represented over here. On my right, Ira Pande, who translates from Hindi into English. Next to her, and we'll talk more about Ira and the work she does in the process of our conversation. Saleem Kidwai, who translates from Urdu into English. So now you've got the two vast languages of the north covered. And now if we go further south, we have Lakshmi Holmstrom, and I can tell you that I would give an arm and a leg to be Lakshmi Holmstrom myself. She has single-handedly translated the finest Tamil literature. Is that the right way to pronounce it, Tamil? Right, I'm not even going to try. Both prose and poetry, which is an incredible feat, and that's something we are going to talk to her about. And finally, we have Lakshmi Kannan, who is also a very rare person because she is a writer and a translator not only of other people's work, but also her own work. So she's the only one here with 3 personalities. Thank you. We're talking here today on a slightly elusive and enigmatic subject titled The Face Behind the Mask. And I'm going to start by asking each of you to take exactly about a minute each to tell me what you think the face behind the face and the mask is when it comes to translation. Ira, would you like to go first?
I want to make this a sort of personal assessment. It doesn't hold true for everyone. I have in my mind 2 books that I've translated. One where there was a mask hiding the face, which was my mother's work, and the other where there is a face without any mask. So I had to find something to cling on to in order to bring out the nuances. And this is a book which is going to be released shortly, Prabha Khaitan's autobiography called Anya Se Ananya, which I've translated as A Life Apart. So these are the 2 ends of a spectrum where one, a writer hides behind a mask and you have to feel and grope for that. And the other where the author is in your face, and it is a completely unsettling experience to be able to communicate that depth straight away.
You want to tell us a little more about how the act of translation achieves what you talked about?
For me, it is a search for a voice. I feel that in many cases, if you're sure you've got the voice and the timbre right in your head, then you've managed to. But sometimes it eludes you, because the author changes voice or changes face, and you feel you're on a very tricky ground. So for me, translation really is a search for a voice, which is why I think I called my first work Didi, my mother's voice, because that is what I was searching. I think that is the voice that I search in every author that I translate.
Lakshmi Holmstrom, may I ask you, we talk about being faithful in translation, and I'm not going to repeat that old cliche about being beautiful or faithful, but not both, and I've just done and repeated it. But what is it that you are faithful to when you are translating? Because there's so many different aspects to the original text. Is this causing the feedback?
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. This business of faithfulness is really a non-goer, I think. What is one being faithful to? And faithful, that is very questionable. You're not going to be able to replicate the text. This is quite clear, because 2 languages are extremely different in terms not only of lexis and syntax, the words and the grammar, the sentence order in the paragraph, but it's also cultures that you're translating, the allusions, and eventually the style, the voice. I think Ira's exactly right. I think what you're trying to capture is that resonance, and to be truthful, faithful to that. If you try to be truthful, faithful to every word, you're not going to manage that. And in fact, the sense of the text, the poem or prose will elude you if that's what you do. If you look for something else, the poetic logic, the voice, the author who's speaking, and try to be truthful to that, then you might have achieved something in your translation.
Thank you. Saleem, Kidwai, the book that you've translated recently, a book of short stories, The Mirror of Wonders, it is the most amazing set of tales where every story features one or more animals. And you could call them animal fables, but there's so much more than that. What was it about these stories that you felt you had to reproduce and capture in the course of translation? Why did you want to do it in the first place?
Oh, I wanted to do it because I wanted this author known, and I knew that if it wasn't in English, he wouldn't have been known. I mean, he died in 1944, not too many people know him. So for me, the stories were very good, and my compulsion was, it was like a conservation job. I had to save him from being forgotten. But coming back to voices, because that was crucial in the second book, or third book actually, here finding the author's voice was one. The problem was that he was speaking in animal voices too. And many animals sometimes in the same story. So you'd have human beings, human characters, animal characters, and finding their voice, you have to find it in your own. Because the author's voice is among all these people. So the author's voice, once I found it, then it was much easier for me to work with these animals. The author, unfortunately, I didn't know very much about him, and he hasn't written too much. So it took a lot of time figuring out what this voice was about. Now, the other thing about voice, and Ira talked about her great first book. I did a similar memoir of a courtesan singer, Malka Pukhraj, and for me, as a male, finding a voice for the woman was a huge challenge. I mean, I knew her voice. It made my hair on my hand stand at an end when I heard her. But how she would speak, how she would reveal herself, I could not have done it unless, if I hadn't met her, spent 6 weeks with her. Because I had to get, it was written in Urdu, but it was Punjabi Urdu, so I had to get that right. So the cultural thing was very, very important for me to go and live in Lahore for 6 weeks with her.
So I'm going to come back to this business of capturing the voice later, but meanwhile, I'd like to ask you, Lakshmi Kannan, tell us a little bit, because you are among those very few people in the world who translate their own work. And I know you want a difficult question on this, but why don't you just tell us what it's like? What is the process, and how do you look at your own work when you're translating it?
Thanks, Arunava. First of all, I don't translate all that I write in Tamil. I make a selective choice there. And then I ensure that there is a distance between when it appeared and when I have decided to translate. In the meantime, I'm also getting translated quite extensively into Hindi. There are 3 collections of my works in Hindi, anthologies. So then I get a feedback about the stories in Tamil. Like, if I may return for a minute to the question that you asked, the title, the face behind the mask. For instance, the title story Nandanvan of my most recent collection, which I autographed for you, that has a curious experience. As a writer, I would like to share it with you, because I consider myself as this writer who's busy writing in English, writer busy who's writing in Tamil, and it's a divided loyalty, and there are people who think, oh God, she's all lost to English and all that. So I wrote the story, Nilam Nandavanamanapin, for a small literary magazine in Tirupur. And when I sent it to him, he said, oh, I thought you were going to write a fantastic story. Can you give me another story? This is a Kaka Kuruvi story. For those of you who understand Tamil, it's a Kaka Kuruvi fable. It's a sparrow crow story. This story caught on very well in Hindi. It caught on even better in Marathi. And then I realized that there were things in the story that people are relating to, and I translated it into English. I'm coming back to your question, how does it feel? I have given myself the distance of time and the distance of when I wrote it. And of course, I'm also having the consciousness of the feedback that I have received. And then I sat around to translate it. And the experience is, sometimes it's like rewriting a story in English. Sometimes I try to, sort of pull myself back to the textual order. And very often I do that. And it is an experience, but I wouldn't like to keep on translating my stories. Hereafter, I think I would just like to let my Tamil stories be and let others translate, so because it's so tiring. I would rather go on to my next new story or a new poem or something. It is so time-consuming. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to come back to the idea of the voice. Ira Pande, you brought it up first. How do you know when you've captured the author's voice as a translator?
I agree with Saleem that it helps if you have known the author personally. And in that sense, so far, up to the last book that I've now done, I knew both my mother, of course, and Manohar Shamji, whose book I translated. So it helps a lot when you know the person, because it's not just the voice is a sort of metaphor for the entire persona of that person. This was my first blind translation, the one that I've just finished doing. And it was easy because, as I said, there was no hiding behind mirrors and it was a completely straight, honest striptease, a literary striptease where she's actually peeled off every skin like an onion and placed it before you. But I just want to add one more rider to this, is that when we're talking mainly of translations into English, there is another dimension which Lakshmi ji has talked about, where you're translating from one Indian language to another, which is a much easier translation because you have the same cultural matrix. In Hindi, for instance, we have 3 ways of addressing people, tum, tu or aap. Now that's completely lost when you translate it into English. So you have to devise a way in which the aap is different from the tu. Hindi itself is a mixture of Avadhi, Purvi, Maithili. It is so many layers within Hindi, and especially in I translated a book of a collection of my mother's stories which she had written on jailed women. She's written a Kumauni Hindi, she has written Bundelkhandi Hindi, she's written Avadhi, and to try and get those nuances into one sort of literary language was a huge challenge. So there's that as well. It's not simply a translation from one language to another.
How do you do it?
Then you have to know those languages. You have to have them in your head at least for you to be able to get the cadences. Bundelkhandi is very different from Avadhi. And if it is not visible to anyone but you, then you've done a good job.
If the vocabulary is different in variations, in English, do you also use a different vocabulary, or is it only in the rhythms and cadences that you bring out the differences?
There you have to do some kind of calisthenics, I think, because English in that sense is a very, very bland, monotone. There's just one language that you hear because that's the Anglo-Saxon vocabulary that we've all grown up with. I would be interested in what other panelists have to say on this.
Yes, Lakshmi, Holmstrom, how do you deal with this?
Are you talking about dialect? May I just say one more thing about voice and not keep on lingering on it? So forgive me if I go back on that.
Please go right ahead.
It's okay. Can you hear me now? No? Yes. Okay, is that better? Yes, I think it is. Yes, this thing about voice, I think the voice of which the author chooses to use in any one text is different in each case. So it's not as if there's one author's voice. It's as if the author makes a choice to use a particular style of voice depending on the character who tells that particular fiction. So it's it's never easy. You're always trying to find for that text, that particular voice or pitch or tone. I think we'd all agree with that. About dialect, we have the same thing in Tamil. In that, there are so many dialects. You know, if somebody opens their mouth to speak Tamil, and you've instantly placed them according to number of categories of class, region, etc., etc. Now, of course, you can't get those very same cadences in English, but I disagree that English is a flat language. I think it was lovely Simon Armitage who was saying yesterday, that you open your mouth to speak English and you're instantly placed according to class and region. Your accent, sometimes your use of words, sometimes your grammar will give you away straight off. But we can't match these up. It's difficult to match these up. So you have to, and this is the translator's art, you have to allow that to us, that we have to find a way of indicating these fine differences of tone within a text.
All right, so to switch gears a bit, Saleem, Kidwai, let me ask you, how do you deal with bad writing? I'm sure in the course of your translation, you may find a passage which is not quite as good as the rest.
I mean, you go ahead and translate and try and make it more readable. You see, in any case, you're changing substantially the text when you, just by transmitting into another language. So even stuff that's well written, we are transforming in a certain way. So I don't see why stuff that we don't like can't be worked with the same dedication. I have people often asking me, and this is not a boast, particularly about the Malka Pukhraj book, saying, is the original as good as this? And I'm initially surprised, you know. I mean, of course it's good, otherwise it wouldn't have produced this translation. Of course, there's always the temptation to rewrite, you know, and for someone who translates herself, that might be always there, you know. I mean, I've done this, now I can say it another way. But I resist that. I try and not, I don't see it as bad writing, because otherwise it would be sort of judging the author beyond my decision to translate him. I've chosen the author to translate because there's something of value in there. So,
do you want to comment on that, Lakshmi, Kannan? You have views on this, I know.
Yeah. When I translated, for instance, T. Janakiram, he was alive, he's no more now. And when I was doing it, not that I'm proud of the book, I mean, it was done way back in the 80s, and now I would do it very, very differently. But there were, you know, I had the challenge of translating this fascinating cunning innuendos of Tanjavur Tamil. Very cunning. They say one thing, they mean something else. And you get that whiff of it in Tamil. It's very difficult to translate that into English. That was one challenge. Another challenge I found was in his dialogue, I found that he was swallowing a few words at the end, and it could be completed. So since he was a living writer then, and he considered me as a real, you know, greenhorn around that time, and he was very fatherly and all that. So he used to come around and say, "Edana panni sari pannidu. Please do something and sari pannidu." That is, you do repair work. You do some damage control or repair work. So with his permission, I did that. Otherwise, most of his dialogue would come in very staccato, and that can irritate. How much of staccato, you know, lines can you take on a page? So that was that. So otherwise, yeah, there are lines that when you're translating another writer or even your own, there may be a flawed line. You feel like you're itching to just correct it or improve it. So sometimes I do it.
Sometimes he does it.
Yep.
Right? That's a confession. Ira Pande, tell me, how transparent can a translator really be, in all honesty?
You know, I always say that a translator is like a foster parent, in the sense that you are holding a child in your arms which was given birth by some
I
other
think
person.
it's probably a little difficult to hear. Shall I just bring that a little closer to you? you'll feel a little assaulted by the mic. Yes. Sorry.
Feeling assaulted by this as well.
No, I was saying that as a translator, I always look upon myself as a foster mother. That the child I'm bringing up or dressing up, let us say, is a child who was born of another mother's womb. And no matter how close I feel to that child and how much I wish I had written that book was written by somebody else. And I think that distance must remain both within the text and within your own relationship, because otherwise it becomes very difficult to go from one author to another if you subsumed your own identity so completely into another person's. And this happened with me when I started translating my mother, and I stopped at a certain point because I felt I was beginning to talk like her, write like her, think like her, and I didn't know who I was anymore. So it's probably what stage artists and film artists feel also when they do a very highly charged emotional role. For some time you forget who you are. You really have to become somebody else. It's very difficult. I'm sure all of us who are here have felt some degree of this closeness and a necessary distance that you have to also maintain in order to be critically aware of what you are doing. That's what I feel about
I think that would be a very helpful attitude to take to a work by another person, be a foster mother, because you feel it instantly puts you in a very protective frame of mind.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I'm happy with the foster mother approach. I think there's an equality between author and translator. I think there's a negotiation that's going on between the two languages, between the text, the original text, and the text as it happens. And of course, the text that is happening does have to be filtered through the translator's reading. We all read in our own way, and we would all interpret very slightly differently, each of us, whatever we read. That's part of translation. You read as closely as possible, but you also are always filtering it through all that you've read and all that you've written. So I always think of it as a negotiation between the two texts, between the two languages.
Can I just, we're talking the same point basically. What I'm saying is that negotiation for me takes place when I choose to translate a particular text. Not everything. I may like an author very much, but I know that this will not be, I cannot translate it.
Right,
It is untranslatable, and if you want to read it, you have to read it in the original.
Right.
There are some works which are brilliant but which are untranslatable. I'll just give you one example of a novel which I have wanted to translate so much, and I still haven't found the courage. It's Kasab by Manohar Shyam Joshi. And his wife, in fact, has said that if I don't translate it in her lifetime, she's going to write in her will that I have to do it before I die.
Right.
So it is a huge responsibility, and
Yes.
it is absolutely the most brilliant novel that has been my pleasure to read. And yet I haven't found the vocabulary, the courage, the strength to do it yet. So that negotiation takes place for me before I choose to translate.
Yes, indeed.
But my relationship with the text when I'm doing it is really that of a nurturer. I want the reader to feel the same love for that book that I have derived from it. That is what I mean.
Yes, obviously. And I agree with you. One chooses the texts that one is happy with. At least I never take on a text that I'm
Commissioned
not completely committed to. But that's a different matter from the way you're actually working on the text. And that process, yes, of course, is of celebration because you love the text, otherwise you're not. But you're also constantly, as the craft is happening, negotiating.
All right, I need to interrupt for a moment to ask all of you to stop being translators and be authors and speak loudly.
Okay.
The audience cannot hear all of us clearly. We can't be so transparent. A small commercial break. I'm just going to read to you a line I found recently from the great Gregory Rabassa. And I just thought I'd say it just to hear you smile, see you smile. We must take what small comfort we can in knowing that we are doing something honorable in a world of imposters, pretenders, and bourgeois tradesmen. Do you think he's right?
Well, in the context of Indian literature, I think yes, because as you said, the great Indian novel is not going to be written in English.
Ah, thank you. I've got my cue for the next statement. You know, I'm really tempted to take a voice vote here. Do you think that the great Indian novel will be found in English or in an Indian language? Anybody think it's English? Wow.
I want to react to that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, because of the seminars, maybe I was in the wrong seminars or the very right seminars, I don't know. But there is so much of English bashing, you'd be surprised, Arunava. So much of English bashing going on and so much of intellectual dishonesty and doublespeak in these, special translation seminars. They'll take a text of English translation, they'll take a text in regional language translation, they'll compare one to the other very unfavorably, valorize one language to the other naturally. You can't compare a plum to a peach. It can never be the same in English. And my works could lend itself very well into Hindi translations. No problem there, or Kannada, for that matter, because most of my, scenario and characters are Kannada. But it is going to sort of grate somewhere in English, somewhere. So what? So what? So, and I call that intellectual dishonesty because once the seminar is over and it's all a tea break, the same vociferous voice that you heard bashing in English would come and say, "Madam, can you translate me into English, please? I have a story. Everybody praises it. Will you do it in English, please?"
But nobody's bashing English here. I mean, we wouldn't be translating into English if we didn't value that language as much as our own. But I want to question the whole notion of the great Indian novel anyway. I mean, what is it? What is this notional great Indian novel?
Well,
we have a lot of very good novels. Need these be so representative of this notion of India? I don't
No, that's very important. I'll tell you how the thought came to me. I remember, I was reading about the World Cup being, the venues for the Football World Cup tournaments being announced. And it was announced that one of the future tournaments was going to be held in Russia. And I asked several people, what do you think about the Football World Cup in Russia? And they said, Russia, Anna Karenina, yes, Russia. So I thought, if India ever got the World Cup and people around the world were thinking of India, what book would they think of? India, the Mahabharata maybe. So, that was why I wondered whether...
Bad
yes.
form for me to ask a moderator a question. But you see, today, coincidentally or very, very, it is dovetailing with this forum, Ananthamurthy is nominated for the Booker Prize. Isn't it one of the very first time that a language writer in translation?
Yes, that's right.
All the Nobel winners are language writers. They call them, how do they dismiss us?
Bhasha.
Bhasha writers. We are the Bhasha writers. We are not the English, the Anglo writers. So when we write in our language. So the Nobel winners are getting it. But this time Booker, the very Anglophonic kind of, background that they have nominated Ananthamurthy. So you may wish to say more.
Arunava, may I just add something
yes,
here? Is that, when we are talking of Hindi, English, Marathi, English, whatever, it's English which becomes, in our minds, the primary language that we all have to, it's like somebody asking Ambai to translate his or her work into English.
Sorry.
When we read Russian books or Latin American books or even somebody like Orhan Pamuk, are we even aware that these are translated works? We don't give enough importance to our writers. That is what I feel bad about, the Marathi writers, the Bengali writers, the Gujarati writers. Somehow it becomes important who your translator is. That should be, we are doing it the other way around. Publishers, when they market their books, will say, this is translated from a famous Hindi. Why are you already placing a value judgment on one language over the other? So we have to change this, and I hope it will change. I mean, we've come a long way from the early years of translation to now. I hope that the next step will be that we are actually looking at our own writers with as much respect as we look at, let us say, an Orhan Pamuk or, a Latinova Borges or whatever.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, but yes.
That is why I feel that it is important that translators plod on and become more and more anonymous. We should really efface ourselves. We shouldn't be here. The authors should be here. And
the thing is, isn't it, Ira, that not everybody will be able to read in the world,
right,
Hindi or whatever it is. And okay, so there might be an ideal world at some time when we're all speaking a number of important world languages, but that isn't happening now. So if I value a particular novel and I think this must be read, then my only way to put it to a world audience is to translate it to the best of my ability.
I agree.
That is the situation now. I would love for us to come to a point where on the shelves of any bookshop in England you can find Ashokanathan or Ambe or my lovely friend Sundar Ramaswamy. I would love to have them there as commonplace as Orhan Pamuk or whoever. Look, I am doing my best with this one. Okay, all right. So what I was saying is that it would be wonderful if sometime in the very near future I could walk into a bookstore in England and pick off the shelves a collection of stories by Sundar Ramaswamy or Ashokanathan or Ambe. But the only way that's going to happen is for a translation to hit a wider audience and for us somehow to educate a readership which is willing to listen to these, to read these and listen to them.
Let me ask you, Saleem Kidwai, do you agree that we should form Translators Anonymous? No one should know who we are, which I completely subscribe to, by the way. But if that is so, and your name is no longer going to appear on the cover, so let me ask you personally, why do you translate?
Did I say a translator should be anonymous? I didn't say that.
No, fine. Then if you don't believe in that, then give us the other view.
No.
Good.
So you think that the translator's name and identity is equally important to people reading the book? And
you see, it's important. Now I don't want to get into equal or not equal, but it's equally important for the book to be there on that shelf, as Lakshmi just said. I mean, if the translator isn't there, this person is going to be forgotten, not known, unknown to many people who don't speak that language, and particularly with Urdu, where the numbers are declining. The need for that is much, much more, because otherwise this literature is going to disappear. And the only way it can be saved is by getting more people reading this stuff. And then if the author isn't around, I disagree with Ida saying that the author should be here. I don't think so. If the author is not here, doesn't mean his work shouldn't be discussed. If the author is dead, he's been dead for 60 years.
All right. So is there anyone else who will tell me, no, I think you have to tell me, since Ida already has, about why you translate?
Okay, why do I translate?
And also, pardon me for interrupting, but you also need to tell me why and how you do such a good job of both prose and poetry.
Oh. Let me answer the first question. Okay. Why do I translate? I translate, first of all, because I want to celebrate this piece of work. I think it's good. I want it to be better known. That's the main drive. I'm doing it also for myself. I think that the best translator is also the closest reader. And there's a joy in that. There's a joy in looking at a text very, very closely and to get to work as closely as possible to get the sense, the meaning, the rhythm, the resonance. So there's a sort of scholarship angle, which I personally love. And there's a third thing which I want to mention. There's a play aspect in translation. You're playing with two languages. And ever since I was a child who had the great fortune of knowing two languages, I've always played. And I think a number of us in India do this naturally. How would I say this in English, or how would I say this in Tamil? You're doing it all the time, and you're doing it on a much bigger scale. It's that playfulness, if you like, which also pleases me. I really love all those aspects of translation.
Thank you. And by the way, translators live to ripe old ages. Recent research shows that those who are very good with two languages tend to live longer.
Oh, I don't know whether that's a good thing or not.
Lakshmi, Kannan, let me ask you, although you've mentioned this earlier, what is it like to get reception to your work in translation? You're the only one here who also represents the author's point of view. Are you, and tell me honestly, your work has been translated by others, right?
Yes, into Hindi, Marathi.
And are you jealous of a good translator?
Who is jealous?
Are you jealous of a good translator?
No, why?
Well, you know,
That's strange. Why
I
would
think
be
the
jealous of
translators
a
here
good
know why I'm asking this question.
Yeah,
No, seriously.
I would be thankful.
No, I know. What is it like when you get reactions to translations of your work?
Oh yes, it's so very heartwarming to begin with, and you get immense, enlarged readership for one thing. Readers in Hindi, Marathi, and English, of course. Occasionally, I've been translated into French, and those are flash in the pan kind of a thing. But otherwise, it's mostly very nice, and it sort of unshackles the work, unshackles it from the regional milieu, and they seem to get sometimes much more out of the work than a regional Tamil reader would get. And I don't like to say this, but it is the truth. It is the truth. They are, I don't know, I don't want to use adjectives like they're liberated or what, I don't know what, but they seem to get more out of our work than my regional counterparts could have got. This has been my experience.
Ida Pande, I'm going to ask all of you actually, what's the best thing that anyone's ever told you after reading one of your translations?
That it was seamless, that they didn't feel that they were reading a translated work. That, I think, is the best thing that one can get as a critical remark.
Do you agree, all of you?
No,
Yes,
you get a
absolutely.
dubious compliment. That's better than the original. You don't know what to do about
Yes.
it. You just don't know what to do about that statement. It's better than the original.
You've got to, with, for instance, reviews of translations, at the most they're going to write a sentence or two, either praising you or banning the translation. So, in a way, you think you're not very invested in the review because if they say it's all right, your translation is good, it's fine. It isn't. You're as much concerned about what the reviewer thinks about the original work because you're just as invested in it. For me, I would just be as devastated if someone said this author is no good. Because Lakshmi says you choose it because it's a personal commitment there. So I think this made me very nervous because if people said this guy is no good or this memoir is no good, I would have failed. I would have thought I had failed her or him.
But on the positive sides, that's the negative.
No, that's a positive. That when you get a review saying that the author is very good,
Right.
and even if your own this thing is dismissed in two sentences or one sentence.
I think I do agree with Ira again. It's when somebody says, I hadn't realized it was a translation. It stands up on its own. And this is what you want to do for the original text, to find a way of saying it in another language so that it stands up on its own. And it takes on its own life. A translation always takes on its own life, quite extraordinarily so.
And what do you think? Do you think our critics and critics by and large around the world do a good job of critiquing translated books?
Of late, yes.
Yes?
Yes, of late. Quite a few critics are very sensitive to translators, and I'm happy to say quite a few editors have this culture sensitivity when they have, even if it's my editor was a Bengali, is a Bengali, and but she used to really work very, very hard on whatever elements she found obscure, and she'd get back to me and understand very sensitive. So this culture sensitivity is there, and things are looking up, I think.
You wanted to read us a few lines from one of your works.
Only to, or just a word, how much time?
We have time for you to read, please.
Only to illustrate the three-tiered experience I go through of getting translated by others, translating other writers, and translating my own. And when I translate my own and I negotiate with an editor, because, translating certain ethnic terms in title, I don't like that to be, if it is not translatable, I would like it to be given as in the original language, in Roman, and have a glossary. For example, I have a story called Yajamana. It's about a very competent senior lady whose husband is a complete recluse. She's this well-to-do lady managing farmhands, labor, huge extended family, and very, very capable. And she is the title is Yajamana, she is the Yajamana. And in Bangalore setting, Yajamana means manager or husband or the boss. So this I worked it out, and the editor wanted to call it husband or something, so I could negotiate and fight for it. So I would like, when I translate an author, to take enough interest and join me when I, give it to the editor, and not exactly fight, but negotiate and argue that Mitro Marjani cannot be translated. Yajamana cannot be translated. So I fought my way through, clawed my way through. But it was not so very difficult because the editor was very sensitive, and they had a meeting with the publishers. They were toying with the idea, and now it is Yajamana, because she's, to go a step further, she's so independent and such a handsome senior lady that she finds space for nursing her romance with a very senior man. She's this respectable, formidably respectable Brahmin lady and something like that, but she treasures her relationship with a very senior man, and her granddaughter knows that and relates to that. So she's that independent. She is her own Yajamana. So I wouldn't let a publisher call this novel, this story a husband or something.
Right.
She's her own husband.
Well, it's a remarkable world that we live in, where the word for husband and manager and boss is the same.
Kannada. In Kannada, Marathi.
In most
it got
Indian
translated
languages.
into Marathi. It was
Most Indian languages.
Marathi. In Hindi, it's Yajman.
Kumaun, it's Malik.
Yajman. In Hindi, it got translated. In Marathi, as Yajman. Like that.
Yes. All right. Thank you. That's great. Now we are open for questions from the house. Yes. Okay. The lady there in the front, in the row. Yeah. We'll come to you straight afterwards.
Hello. This question is addressed to the two Lakshmis. I just want to know that...
There are two of us.
Yes.
Does the fact that being Tamilian gives you a certain comfort level in capturing the true essence of Tamil literature? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, does knowing the nuances of the language make you a better translator?
There's a comfort level. Did I read you right? You were asking.
Yeah.
There's a comfort level in Tamil.
But being a Tamilian gives you a certain comfort level with the language,
and that
allows you to capture the true essence of Tamil literature.
Oh, it helps tremendously. It helps a lot.
But you have to
Otherwise
know
you're not.
the nuances of the language. Otherwise, why are you translating? That's what it's all about. You have to know not just the language, you have to know the grammar, the structures. And with classical literature, you have to know something about metrics, the way the prosody works. If you don't have that understanding of that language, then you have no business in translation. And equally, let me say, if you're translating into English, you have to have an awareness of the nuances of the grammar and how that grammar works. And if you're translating poetry, the metrics and prosody. So without those, there's no craft of translation.
We can't forget we serve two masters. So we have to have an equal loyalty for English and the English target audience. It has to be idiomatic. Even if there is a cattish, very regional language fundamentalist in the dark interior Tamil Nadu saying it's so English, the story is so English. Even if he says that, you bypass that, but you have to be loyal to the English target crowd.
Thank you. Yes.
Namaskar. My question is that when you all chose to translate, were there some questions you faced by yourself and the people around you? And are there any of those questions which recur during this time?
One of you needs to answer that.
No. I can't think, because this was a private exercise for a long time. I was answerable to nobody but myself and the text that I was translating. And only when I was completely sure that I had done as much as I could to bring out that translated text into another language, was I brave enough to even show it to some reader and then later on to a publisher.
I would like to ask the panel, with due respect, that how far do you think the translations till date have taken us away from the ancient classics?
Okay, I'm not sure what you mean, taking us away from the classics?
I mean, translation is a complex compromise. But how far do you think somewhere on a certain level we have been driven away from our classics?
You mean how close are the translations of the classics to the original?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, translations vary, don't they? Just as interpretations of the classics will vary, we do have different translations of, let me say, the Tirukural, for example. It's a difficult metric stanza to equate in English, and sometimes it comes off beautifully and sometimes not. But we have to accept that there are a number of even native Tamil speakers who are no longer reading the classics. And they might read the classics in translation and then go back to the original. That's one of the hopes of translation. There are some good translations of, some excellent translations of Sangam poetry by Ramanujan. There can be no better, I really do believe. How can that be taking us away from the classics? It's leading you to the classics. He speaks so beautifully of the poetics of ancient Tamil literature. Without that, I think a number of Tamils and non-Tamils would have lost that. So yes, and so yes, there are varying translations, but they will at least lead you back to those classics. That is the idea.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
My question is for you only. You talk about adding a new life to your translations. don't you think it's injustice to the original writer's work?
Sorry?
I'm not sure. Adding new life? Maybe you meant that phrase in a particular context.
I've never said that I'm adding new life to the translation.
No, fine, thank you. I think there
No,
are people at
what
the
I
back.
did say, and I think you're misreading what I said the translation takes on a life of its own, which is not to say that I'm adding new life to it. It just happens that the text is read, the text in translation is read and takes on a life of its own.
Yes, all right.
Can we take 3 questions at a time and then get on
then
to
can we
answering?
go to the back, please?
Sure.
Because there's a gentleman in grey who's expressed his desire much earlier. First come, first serve. I'm so sorry. We'll come to you. You're in
Hi,
grey as well.
my name is Devdutt Patnaik. And whenever we talk of translations, it's always talk of how non-English languages are being translated into English. We don't really talk much about English writing being translated to non-English languages. And the reason I'm asking this is because I have written 25 books. Only one children's book has been translated into local languages. And when you go to the publishers and you say that I don't want royalty, do it free, I want this to go, and they'll say, nee, nobody's interested in this, no really, because I write in mythology. They're saying, no, Indians don't want to read about religion. They only want to read about Stephen Covey. So, do you face this problem with publishing houses who control what should be published in different languages?
I think publishing houses will always control what's published. That doesn't prevent translators from translating what they want to translate.
No,
But
they were very slow to warm up to publishing translations
That's
at all.
right, that's
But
right.
that was also because the quality of translation sometimes is very indifferent. So one can't really say that they have a bias against. It's just that it has to be a great translation in order to find a publisher.
Yes, and it's not either or really. Both can happen in parallel. All right, the lady over there, please.
One last question.
No, you said 3, so there's one more coming.
My question is specifically to Lakshmi Holmstrom. I was very interested when you said that there was this play between the languages. And I wanted specifically to ask you whether that play is the politics of translation. Because I just love your translation of Ambai. And the reason why you choose Ambai the way you do and the way you have translated her, isn't there a politics involved in it?
There is a politics involved in that. I'm so much with what she's...
Your mic. Come closer to it.
Okay, can you hear me? There is a politics involved in that. I so much find it easy to translate Ambai's work because what she says I so much resonate too. When I talked about the play between 2 languages, it's purely in the craft, in the actual making of the translation, when you're trying out what fits, what is right. Should I do it this way? Does that sound closer to what Ambai intended? Because she writes very beautifully in Tamil. And I need to find an English that works, that is doing justice to that. And then, and you're always constantly adjusting the English and playing with that. And that is the joy, in one sense, of translation. That's what I meant.
Thank you. And one last question there. Yes.
Hi. So my question is that I have friends from different states, Gujaratis and Haryanvis and Tamil and all. And like when we are talking about stories and maybe translation or classics, so they prefer to read it in English. And they have told me, oh, now I can't read Hindi because, now I studied all in English. So how do you think about it? Like now people are getting away with their own language and classic, which was written in maybe Sanskrit, Tamil or Pali. But now they prefer it to read in translated languages.
Yes.
Like English or anything else.
Right.
So
Thanks.
what do you
Saleem,
think?
Kidwai, can I ask you to respond to that?
love.
You know, this happens particularly, in my case, I find this all the time about Urdu, because a lot of people whose mother tongue is Urdu can't read it. So what I find in reverse is that it sometimes encourages people to want to learn the language. And if a few people are doing that, if my translation is leading a few people to the original, I think I've done my service. Of course, there'll be a lot of people who find it easier because it's lazy. It's easier to do it, to read in a translation in a language that you know better. But if it motivates you to brush up a language or actually learn to just read it, you know, you might know the language, you don't know the script. I think that's one important job that I've done, is lead people back to the language. And it happens in Urdu particularly all the time.
Yes, Lakshmi, Kannan, you also
The same thing. It's happened to me reading a translation. Like I wish I knew more Hindi, that I could read. I would read Chitralekha in the original. I read a shoddy translation. Still, it couldn't spoil it. That intellectual dynamism and dialectic that is there, you know, the energy that is there. So it does make you long and want to learn more, you know, about that language, know the language better, so that you read the original. It does.
Right. Thank you, Ida Pande, Saleem Kidwai, Lakshmi Holmstrom, Lakshmi Kannan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arunava,
for a very stimulating morning. And for those of you who have more questions, please first go to the bookshop and buy their books, then get them signed, then ask them questions. Thank you. Have a great day.
Wonderful panel of authors. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You have been a great audience. The next session